here for today's webinar, the first of the webinar series brought to you by KPMG Vietnam. KPMG has been in Vietnam since 1994 and is one of the largest professional services firms in the country with offices in Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, and Da Nang. Today, we are proud to feature two of KPMG's experienced market entry experts to give you an overview on the macroeconomic conditions for investment in Vietnam and share up-to-date info on trends and issues for those interested in doing business in the country. Before we begin, I would just want to go over a couple of housekeeping issues. First, as you can see, we have an informative webinar planned for you, full of key topics that touch upon investing in Vietnam. Second, we have set aside the last 20 minutes of the webinar for a question and answer session. If you have a question for one of our speakers, we want to hear from you. Please submit your questions by typing into the chat window at the bottom left corner of the screen and then hit send. I will collect the questions from the chat window as we go and share with our speakers after the presentation. Thank you to all the participants who've signed on for joining us for this first webinar. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers for today. First, we have Dr. Nguyen Gong Ai, Partner in Advisory and Strategy. As head of the Market Entry Group for KPMG in Vietnam, Dr. Ai has been involved in providing market entry advisory services to many international companies seeking investment opportunities in the country. Next, we have with us Mr. Huỳnh Nguyen, a partner at KPMG in Vietnam. Nguyen has a solid background working in KPMG's corporate tax groups and is now leading our transfer pricing group. Thank you to Dr. Ai and Nguyen for joining us today. And without further delay, I will turn over the floor to Dr. Ai and Nguyen, who can speak to you about today's hot topic. Dr. Ai.
So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining our webinar today. I'll be, in the next maybe 20-25 minutes, I'll be talking to you about the economy of Vietnam, and especially about the investment opportunities in Vietnam. So on the first slide, we will see that Vietnam is a country of 90 million people. Yeah, and very interesting that what we call golden age in Vietnam, that the population of Vietnam consists of very young people, and 60% of this of the total population of Vietnam is in the productive age. Nowadays, the country is growing quite fast compared to other economies, and the political situation is quite stable, what allows a lot of investment, and for investors to come to the country with the light heart. The other thing is that the economy of Vietnam is quite oriented to reform, and nowadays we have the SOA reform undergoing with a lot of changes. We expect it to happen in coming years. Nowadays, we see many businesses switch their manufacturing base from China to Vietnam because the country has a quite low low-cost labor, and in addition, Vietnam is a part of the ASEAN economic community, and because of its proximity to South China market, it becomes a very interesting big market for the investors coming to Vietnam. And the other very important factor for the attractiveness of Vietnam economy is that it has 95 million of consumers who are eager to earn and eager to spend. If you look at the slide with the figure on the economic growth of Vietnam, you will see that nowadays the growth rate of Vietnam it's about 6% continuously in the last few years. And in coming years, according to the forecast of international financial agencies in Vietnam, and also according to our forecast, so Vietnam it's expected to achieve further growth of about 6% and above in coming 5 years. So this creates very favorable conditions for doing business in the country. On the inflation rate, so you can see that Vietnam experienced very high inflation in 2011, and before that in 2008. But after this period, nowadays the country experienced a period of stable inflation. What we call stable is that it is kept under 6% for the long time. And in 2016, we do expect that the inflation rate of Vietnam economy is somewhere under 5%. In the next 5 years, according to the IMF, so we do expect it is predicted that the further inflation rate of Vietnam is somewhere also range of 4 to 6%, what is acceptable for the fast-growing economy like Vietnam. On the exchange rate, so there is a system of cooling peak, yeah, that the State Bank of Vietnam is setting the exchange rate of Vietnam on a daily basis, and then allowing the banks to be fluctuated, yeah, by 3% up and down from this rate. So you can see that the foreign currency in Vietnam, it's if we compare the foreign currency, yeah, right, to the Vietnamese now, that it's quite stable. And Vietnam currency, it's devaluated gradually every year from 1% to 3%. So we can see that there is predictable, and it also creates some confidence of the foreign investors coming to the country that there's no surprise, yeah, on the exchange rate front. If you look at the export of Vietnam, you can see that in 2016, the export is higher than the import, what is not very often, that is not very common in Vietnam. Normally, for an economy like Vietnam, in the development stage, import is normally higher than export. But nowadays, we see the situation, it's stabilizing, and nearly export, it's nearly very close to import. On the other hand, we can see because of the influx of foreign indirect investment and of the remittance of the Vietnamese overseas into the country, so the situation is much more bright in front of the foreign currency account, and the current account of the country. Nowadays, if we look at the structure of the import of the country, so China is the number one exporter to Vietnam, followed by Korea and Japan. In front of the exporting market of Vietnam, the USA is still the number one market with 21% of the Vietnam export going to the US, and China is number two, and Japan is number three with nearly 10%. Of the Vietnam export going to this country. The major export items of Vietnam are electronics, followed by textile, computers, and footwear. We can see that traditional items of export of Vietnam like seafood, coffee, or rice are nowadays a little bit left behind the first important items like telephone and printer parts and computer electronics. So it seems to be that nowadays the foreign direct investors are playing more and more important role in the industry of Vietnam. Samsung Electronics alone is exporting, producing most of their smartphones in Vietnam, and nearly 100% of this production is for export. In front of the import of goods into Vietnam, so we can see us in developing economy, so it is importing mostly machinery, instrument, accessories. And the other item is computer electronic products and parts. So the other thing is that textile fabrics and plastic materials are also imported to the country a lot. What you can see from the structure of import is that a lot of import are not for the consumption in Vietnam, but basically for the industrial consumption and for export from Vietnam. You can see that nowadays a lot of telephone and the parts are imported to the country for the further production and export to the country. On the next slide, you can see that the Vietnamese population is a very young population, and if we can count that 60% of the population is from 20 to 60 age. So they are eager to earn money, spend money, and create very big market for simply every product in the country. Nowadays, we can see the big demand for products of the real estate market, flats and apartments market, but also any FMCG is in high demand in the country. Vietnam is not just Vietnam alone. It is opening to the world, and Vietnam is negotiating a lot of free trade agreement with other countries. The most important is that RCEP, that is a group of ASEAN countries plus 6 other countries in Asia and Asia Pacific. Vietnam is has also signed the free trade agreement with the European Union, and this free trade agreement is going to be effective commencing from 2018, and that will be a very important milestone for the development of the export of Vietnam. The other groups that Vietnam is also part of is that Vietnam has also the free trade agreement with Korea, with Japan. They're either as a standalone country or as a member of the ASEAN countries. So I can say that Vietnam is one of the most open market in Southeast Asia and in Asia as a whole. So very open economy, and as a result of that, nowadays the total of export and import of the country accounts for about 170% of the GDP of Vietnam. If you look at the further slide, you can see that the FDI plays very important role in the economy of Vietnam. Nowadays, we can see that commencing from 1987, when Vietnam first opened its economy for foreign investors, nowadays every year we see a lot of foreign investment flowing into country. And according to the MPI, what is the Ministry of Planning and Investment of Vietnam, continuously from 2013 to 2016, now the registered FDI are above 20 billion each year, what is very encouraging. And I would like to emphasize that more importantly, the figure of reimbursed for investment is account for a large percentage of this figure. And in 2016 alone, nearly 16 billion USD was reimbursed in the country. So it's a very high figure of the investment, real money flowing into the country. If you look at some slide, at the bottom of the slide, you can see that by sectors. So in 2016, come as the biggest sector in the FDI, registered FDI, followed by textile and other manufacturing activities. Regarding the origins of the foreign investors, so South Korea, it's the most important investor in Vietnam, followed by Japan and Singapore. Nowadays, we see less investment coming from European countries or the US, but more investment coming from North Asia to the country. Now, I would like to speak about some specific industries of Vietnam, what are very interesting and what is most open for the foreign investors. If you look at the first slide, that is about the equitization of the Vietnamese state-owned enterprises. So very interesting that nowadays the state-owned enterprises account for less and less percentage in the Vietnamese GDP. If we look at into the past, we can see that in 2011 there was the large number of 1,300 SOEs, but 5 years later there was less than 1,000 state-owned enterprises. And nowadays we see the government big plan, very ambitious plan to reduce further this number of state-owned enterprises, and the government has announced a plan to focus only on the strategic important sector of the economy, and nowadays allow the foreign investors and private sector to participate in other less important sector of the economy. So the government want to keep the SOE only in the minimum. The other thing is that you can see that Vietnam State Investment Company has already invested in investment not only in Vietnam but also in many other companies. So it has a big plan to divest further and reduce the state ownership in FMCG company and insurance companies, including important players like farming insurance, cleaning plastic, or FPT Corporation. If you look at the other sector of real estate in Vietnam, nowadays we see that that it's a big market for all the players, including the Vietnamese companies and foreign investors. We see more and more transactions in which the foreign investors are acquiring the projects from the Vietnamese owners. In Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, the two most dynamic markets of Vietnam, we see that the number of transactions is somewhere close to the double figure compared to last year, what is very encouraging. After a period of freezing market, nowadays it seems to be that the real estate market is coming back to its peak, and we do expect that this trend is going to continue in the next few years. One of the elements that is stimulating the development of the real estate market in Vietnam is the new regulation allowing the foreign people, to foreign citizens, to buy and to own the properties in Vietnam. Obviously, they are not allowed to have ownership of the land, but on the land they can have the land use rights and to own the property on the land. On the further slide, you can see that nowadays one of the most dynamic markets in Vietnam is retail. After the opening of Vietnam economy for foreign retailers in 2009, according to Vietnam WTO commitment, so we have seen that a lot of foreign players are coming to the country, including players like Lotte, Eon, and and many other players. And in Vietnam, so nowadays we see also the big dynamics of the markets, especially with M&A activities. You can see that Aeon has bought into TV Mart and City Mart in Vietnam, and nowadays they are the owners of about 50 supermarkets in the country. A very big transaction. What happened last year was a transaction when strengthen both into big C, what it's a trend of the foreign investors into the one of the biggest supermarket chains in Vietnam. And another big transaction was the transaction that a Thai investor bought into Metro Cash and Carry in Vietnam. And the latest development is that the opening of the convenience store chain 7-Eleven in the country. So you can see that all the important players of the retail market in the world nowadays it's present in Vietnam. And now I would like to hand over back to our moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, for giving us such a great overview of macroeconomic conditions of investment in Vietnam, and also for giving us an idea of what some of the hot sectors are as well. We're now going to turn over to Mr. Young, a partner at KPMG Vietnam, who will talk a little bit more about tax incentives for investment. Yan, I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you, Van. Good afternoon. I'd like to give you a quick overview on the environment. Right? So, Vietnam has been very active in reforming some rules in international standards. We also have quite creative the term of 20%. Yeah, and that's what I mentioned in Vietnam. One of the country in this region that has entered into many free trade agreements. So the import duty rate for goods imported to Vietnam is quite competitive as well, including the Vietnam-Europe FTA, which concluded recently and will come into effect from 2018, as Dr. mentioned. So we would expect more investment from Europe. Despite the demise of the TPP, I think Vietnam is still, we believe that there will be something that will replace TPP, right? Japan, Australia, and Vietnam and other countries are still considering of concluding a TPP without the US. So Vietnam truly promote free trade. So companies in Vietnam were subject to corporate income tax like other countries, and the tax rate is 20%. There's tax incentive offered by Vietnam to encourage foreign investment. So tax incentive is granted based on the size of the investment, the location, and the industry. Some of the encouraged investment industry, including high-tech, software production, and processing of agriculture products. Right? And there's a list of locations whereby if foreign investors set up investment in Vietnam, you may be eligible for tax incentives. So tax incentive may include lower preferential corporate income tax rate, for example, like 10% or 15% compared to the standard rate of 20%. Okay. You may also be eligible to some year of tax exemption for up to 4 years of tax exemption from the first year that you start making profit in Vietnam, followed by several years of tax reduction. So 50% of tax reduction for up to 9 years. Vietnam also has VAT, value added tax. In some countries, it's GST, good and service tax, the standard rate of which is 10%. And foreign investors, foreign contractors who do not set up a legal presence in Vietnam, but sign a contract or having income derived from Vietnam, will be subject to a foreign contractor tax regime, withholding tax regime, or if the foreign contractor have a permanent establishment in Vietnam, they can register and pay tax in Vietnam as if being a company incorporated in Vietnam. So I think that's pretty much just an overview on corporate income tax and incentives. It's already clearly provided under the current regulations, you would be able to determine whether you are eligible for tax incentives. However, if you have a large investment of, for example, more than 3 million US dollars, you might be able to apply for more generous tax incentive. Just an overview on personal income tax for employee working in Vietnam or expat working in Vietnam. If you are a tax resident, you would be subject to a progressive rate ranging from 5% to 35%. For a non-tax resident, Vietnam source income would subject to a fixed rate of 20%.
So now going back to Karen, thank you for that overview of the presentation. Yeah, we're going to turn the floor back to Dr. Ai, who will talk about some final takeaway messages about investing in Vietnam. Why invest in Vietnam? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities?
Yeah. Before we become so I believe that we some challenges of doing business in Vietnam. So as I see from my advisor of assisting for investors coming to Vietnam, we see that infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges in doing business in Vietnam. Nowadays, despite the fact that the government of Vietnam is a lot into nowadays, if you want to go to somewhere like country, the one about 200 kilometers from Ho Chi Minh, so we now about 6 hours to get there. So despite the fact that some part of the road is already highway, but another challenge is in the lack of medium to complement the food inside. So very difficult to find highly qualified people. Yeah, really the management food inside. Yeah. The other thing is known as a lot of Vietnam highly dependent on imported raw material. For example, the textile industry, the garment industry, but also the nowadays for someone from they would like to extend their supply network and try to put some of their material from Vietnam, but very difficult for that. They have to buy a lot and import a lot of raw material and human products from other countries. The further challenge of organization is continue nowadays by the learning program of government against corruption, agency and some custom procedures and procedures asking their learning and that is how because of the fact that not everybody is responsibility for the benefit of the businesses involved. But after finance known as the increase of corruption because of the fact that the state budget of the is now one of the biggest priorities of the government. Nowadays, more attention is paid on the tax collection, and businesses are faced with the scrutiny from the tax office. The other side in the industry is the one that supports industry connected to the one on the import of raw materials. So now that it's not easy to find the supplier of certain parts and support and products in Vietnam. If you look at the regulation of Vietnam, so I think there is a lot, but not the very important one of the regulation of Vietnam. Now that we see very fast of the regulation, and sometimes the explanation of laws in Vietnam is not the same from one side to another side. So sometimes you need to prioritize many that with the final policy and with the unity of planning that way in order to get clarity on a point. And all this, the real component for the project letter will be in the law. But to conclude, despite all these challenges, we will see great results from what in Vietnam because of the fact that it is many members of the country that is attracting a lot of attention from we already discussed the first part of our
So that concludes the end of the presentation section of today's webinar. I would like to thank Dr. Ai and Leon also for doing such great presentations on opportunities of investment in Vietnam. We now move to a more exciting part, the question and answer session, and we have quite a bit of number of questions that either participants have submitted before the webinar or have submitted through the chat window. So I want to move on to that first. The first question is someone from Axiata Group, which is, could you elaborate a bit more about state-owned enterprises, especially regarding telecom and the ICT?
I would like to answer to this question. If Jan would like to complement something, comment, give more comment. But as you know, that we informed one of the very big and important part of the reform plan of the government of Vietnam. They have three plans. One is on banking sector reform. They have a plan on the state government reform and the country reform. And in the especially in the telecom and ICT sector, you can see that the government plans to inside the mobile phone is one of the biggest telecommunication companies in Vietnam. But it's a part of the and know that they would like to put that to success to privatization. So there is a firm commitment from the government of Vietnam that they would like to have that done. During this year, we already have seen some big privatization of the sale of the property. For example, Strateco, and Strateco is a listed on the stock exchange and we do expect that when mobile phone is listed on the stock exchange of OTC, it can be one of the big encouragement of the development of the stock exchange in the country. The other big plans of the government is government going to reduce further also their spending as one of the biggest activities in the country. So we will see that the private sector and foreign investors are having more and more room to invest in this sector.
Thank you, Dr. Ai. We have a number of questions about real estate, but let me first answer the question from Mr. Marcin from Vietnam Business Investment. He asked, what is your opinion about the real estate market in the major cities, Ho Chi Minh City, and Hanoi? Many people have talked about this.
Again, I would like to answer to this question before you can making some more comments. The real estate market used to be concentrated in Ho Chi Minh City, but now that it is moving also to cities like Hanoi and Myanmar, and even further cities like Hanoi and Hong Kong. So now that in Hanoi we see a very dynamic market in Hanoi, but as you said, the future of the market is based on many factors, and to move there, the banking institutions in Vietnam. So the policies of the government in relation to the controlling the sector and also the credit of the banking credit in the country. And because of that, we do expect that there is some slowdown in 2017 with regard to the real estate market because of some restrictions in you can know for the buyers of apartment in Vietnam, not in all the market. That is about retail market, but over there, on in the market for developers, we do expect that there will be very dynamic and many transactions happening between the Vietnamese players and foreign players coming to Vietnam and considering the real estate project in the country. Yeah, you want to add something?
All right, looks like we're having some technical difficulties with the sound. So give us 1 second just to reset ourselves real quick. It's because of the internet. When I did it by Wi-Fi, it was smoother last time. But
There's a few more questions.
okay, we still have a few more questions to go.
Another question is, can you please talk a little bit about the intersection of asset and debt for ownership with effective?
I need you to say that into the microphone.
Yeah. So they want to know the maximum. Okay.
You should send the question to her to read out to everyone.
I think that.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
The further question that I have is on the business or the foreign analysis. Yeah, on the foreign investors in the banking sector. Yeah. I believe that you may know about the existing system on the in the of all the foreign and the fact and the 20% of the single, strategic investor in the foreign many people have been discussing about leaving this on the land, nothing happened yet. Yeah, so the current situation the restrictions are in place. Yeah, see the restriction of 1 million investor, I think you will find it and if you are all the investors and the all of the land I have to emphasize that the banking sector is more open to foreigners licenses or 100% you know that you can see that they are 100% hormone the other thing is that nowhere the government also allows all one by one if you want to invest in a common bank in Vietnam, you will buy 200% of the money in the bank. So you can negotiate directly with the bank on how you want to structure the investment and what plan that you want to invest in a credit. So I'm much more open door in the relation.
So we have another question about people investing in apartments in Vietnam. And is there a potential danger of regarding speculation?
Yeah. First of all, I have to say that I'm not an expert in the real estate market, but know that everybody knows that many people are investing in the real estate market in Vietnam and not that in Europe. You know that a lot of people are buying many flats and apartments just for selling further. And really, I agree with the opinion that it creates some risk for the real estate market in Vietnam. Furthermore, if there are many of them financing the construction by bank loan, and if there is any problem with getting the loan back or getting the money to the bank, and it can create some bigger effect in the real estate market. So there is a risk. On the other hand, I still hope for this development of the affordable market in Vietnam. Affordable means that the low price apartment in Hanoi, and more of the developers are involved in this market. We know how that more and more end users, the people who need some apartments can be involved in the real estate market, and this is a stabilizing factor for the real estate market in the coming years. One important part of the real estate market is known as that the government of Vietnam requires a guarantee for a transaction in the real estate market. What is of the new positive move in the regulation in relation to the real estate market.
If you have any more questions, please continue to submit them to the chat window in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, and then we will go through them one by one. But so far, I think we've had a wealth of answers from Dr. Ai and Yan. You have any other questions for me? You want me to ask? Also, if there's any other questions, obviously we've heard a lot about banking and real estate, so of course we can try to tackle those topics in future webinars as well. Just so you know, our next webinar happens to be on one of the topics that we talked about in the Q&A, which is privatizing state-owned enterprises. So that will take place on Thursday, May 16th from 2 to 3 p.m. Vietnam time, and we of course will let all the participants today know about that. And then also the following webinar will be on best practices on deal making in Vietnam, which will be given by another partner, Mr. John Diddy. That will be on Thursday, June 8th. Are there any other questions that we need to answer? If not, I would just like to thank all of you for joining us on our first webinar from KPMG Vietnam, Going for Gold Investing in Vietnam. And shortly, we will send you a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording from today's webinar, as well as our informative slide deck. The email will also include a very brief survey. We would really appreciate hearing what you thought of the webinar today, and if you have other ideas for topics, please help us by responding to that survey. On behalf of our esteemed speakers, Dr. Ai and Mr. Nguyen, as well as the team at KPMG Vietnam, thank you so much for joining us and taking time to view our presentation. Have a great rest of your day.
Good. Yeah, very good.